Today I want to talk about the macroeconomics and foreign direct investments into Japan, and I will show a report by the Japan External Trade Organization, which is available for download. I'll put the link in the description below. And basically it shows the different trends, not only for Japan, but also worldwide, and how Japan has done during the pandemic and now mostly post-pandemic in the year of 2022, let's say by the end of 2021. So we'll start with Japan's current economic condition, the trends in the world and Japan, as briefly mentioned, and trends among companies, consumers, and industries in Japan. And then the second part of this report will focus on trends in foreign direct investment, or FDI, to Japan, inward flows, and inward FDI, or the total amount of foreign direct investments. Let's start with the GDP, or gross domestic product, of Japan. And Japan is number 3 in the world. As you can see, the GDP of Japan is over $5 trillion US, and compared to its population, which is on rank 11th with over 120 million, around 126 million in population. The ranking in 2020 was number 3. So first United States, then China, and then Japan. Germany on number 4 and United Kingdom on number 5. But in terms of population, Japan is on number 11. Now, let's look at the different regions in Japan and its gross domestic product in those different regions. So Japan's regions are attractive markets with a national level of GDP in each of those regions. So here we have a comparison. And we have, first of all, the Kanto region, where Tokyo is also located, which is the highest GDP, and it is comparable. It's just slightly bigger, just the region of Tokyo and its prefectures surrounding it, which is called, or this region is called Kanto, which is roughly bigger in terms of GDP compared to Brazil. Then we have the second biggest region, which is Kansai, which, oh, my apologies. Kansai is actually, if we just take Kansai and compare it to the Chubu region, which is a bit bigger than the region of Kansai, then Chubu is actually bigger. This is where Nagoya is located, so which is the 3rd largest city in Japan after Osaka. And the Chubu region is compared to to Turkey, not Tokyo. Then we have the Kansai region with Osaka, which is comparable to Switzerland, followed by the Tohoku region, which includes Hokkaido as well, which is comparable to Sweden. And then we have the Chugoku region, where we have, my apologies again, we have the Kyushu region, which is comparable to Austria, following by the Chugoku region, where we find Hiroshima, which is comparable to the Czech Republic, and then we have the smallest of the 4 islands, which is Shikoku, compared to Slovakia. Let's move on with the growth rate. So we can see that the Japanese economy fell sharply in Q2 of 2020 because of the impact of the pandemic. And it did make a recovery after 2020, but is kind of not recovering as is expected in 2021. Now, moving on to GDP growth projections for 2022, we have the 2.4 for 2021, just for Japan, 5.1% for the whole world. Then out of that, 5.2% for industrialized companies and 6.1% for developing or emerging countries. And for 2022, we have a projection of 3.2%, so a rather positive outlook, whereas the rest of the world has a rather conservative outlook in terms of comparison to 2022. Then business conditions of Japanese firms. So here you can see the orange line are large non-manufacturing companies, yellow line small non-manufacturing companies, and then blue line large manufacturing companies, and gray small manufacturing companies. And based on a survey that was done in December of 2021, there is a rather positive outlook. So the business conditions of companies have deteriorated significantly during COVID-19 in the year of 2020, but are gradually recovering, as you can see here. And what is interesting is that actually the manufacturing sector is overtaking the non-manufacturing sector. So manufacturing companies have a rather positive outlook, be it big or small, compared to their non-manufacturing counterparts here, non-manufacturing large companies, non-manufacturing small companies. So this is something to keep in mind when looking at the different sectors. Moving on, that there's another survey that was done on the business condition of Japanese companies that have categorized the different companies just in general between large, medium, and small-sized companies. As you can see, the outlook was very negative in the first quarter of 2021, but has actually recovered mostly for large companies, more or less to the same level as pre-pandemic. So what about the consumers? Let's look at the consumer confidence index that shows how the consumers are estimating their spending. And under the impact of COVID-19, the consumer confidence index in April of 2020 was the lowest since 1982, when it was comparable. Since then, the index has been on a gradually recovery trend. As you can see here, we have a level which is comparable to pre-pandemic value. So the consumer confidence index is rather positive compared to the pandemic, and on equal level, compared to when the pandemic started, and on equal level to pre-pandemic at end of 2019 compared to end of 2021. Now, what about the trends in domestic manufacturing? The overall index fell to around the level of 2008, 2009, when the financial crisis, when we had the Lehman shock, and in May of 2020, and has been gradually recovering. So here we can see May 2020, and has been gradually recovering. And particularly the transport equipment industry, which is gray, the largest by weight, declined significantly in May 2020, but made a quick recovery. So this has to do with the strong infrastructure index or transport infrastructure index in Japan. As you might know, Japan is one of the best countries, or one of the countries with the best infrastructure for transport. And since a lot of the shutdown happening and the transport industry, or specifically the equipment industry, suffering a lot from that, this is why the trend was very negative during that time, but it has been recovering afterwards. It still sees a slight downturn because there is still a lot of remote work that has also been implemented in Japan, and the digital transformation is going on in Japan, but the overall trend seems to go back into a positive direction. Now, what about the domestic service industry trends? The overall index improved after May 2020, when it was the lowest comparable since 2008, but remained flat in 2021. So here's the tertiary industry, which we can see we have medical, healthcare and welfare, living and amusement related services, information and communications, which stayed rather strong throughout the pandemic. Then we have wholesale and trade in orange, retail trade in yellow, transport and postal activities in green. So after the second half of 2020, the recovery of overall index and especially that of services related to living and amusement, including tourism and food and beverage services, has been stagnating, as you can see here. We are still waiting for a reopening of a complete reopening of Japan for tourism, for that index to recover. Now let's move on to the second part, which will show trends in foreign direct investment to Japan. And we'll first talk about inward foreign direct investment flows and then the inward foreign direct investment total values or stocks. So foreign direct investment flows into Japan continued to be in the surplus since the fourth quarter of 2015. However, there was a net withdrawal in the net second quarter of 2021. And you might ask yourself, why are there so many foreign direct investments right in the midst of the peak of the pandemic fear in the second quarter of 2022? And I'll explain this in a moment. This shows a better overview. So the inflow of 2020 was foreign direct investment was 7.1 trillion yen by region. The flow from Europe was the largest at 4.1 trillion yen. As you can see here, 4.1 trillion is including, or here the 4.1 trillion is including UK, Switzerland, France, Netherlands, and Germany. So main reason being that since foreign direct investments are also counted if there are lending and borrowing cash flows or financial flows between Japanese companies and their subsidiaries with financial ties. So let's imagine that there is an insurance company which is headquartered in Japan, but they have a subsidiary in the UK, or a financial company, like many do. And because of the uncertainty that happened during the pandemic, a lot of those companies decided to move all their cash out from their subsidiaries into back into Japan, and sometimes, or in most cases, also lend from their Japanese subsidiaries most of the financial or the capital that they could get, and that then was counted as a foreign direct investment. Now, this is a bit tricky to call a foreign direct investment by UK companies because, as mentioned, it is a lending of money by a Japanese headquarter company from their Japanese subsidiary. So not to be mistaken with actual foreign direct investment from actual UK companies that have no financial ties to Japanese companies. Now let's look at the flow of FDI in Japan by industry. By industry in 2020, the flow in the manufacturing industry accounted for 3.2%, while the non-manufacturing industry accounted for 96.8%. By industry in detail, the finance and insurance sector accounted for the largest share at 1.2 trillion yen. So it's, as briefly mentioned, there have been a lot of finance and insurance institutions that have moved their capital out of their foreign subsidiaries back into Japan, also using those lending and borrowing tools that I mentioned, and this is reflected here. So there has not been a lot of foreign direct investment in terms of actually actual foreign companies without any ties to Japanese companies that have made an investment in Japan. So this, of course, has to be taken into consideration. Now, this also shows that the steady growth of foreign direct investment volume in Japan has been continuing, even in 2020. Whereas, again, this can be a bit misleading because there have been a lot of investments through lending money from Japanese subsidiaries in foreign countries. The FDI stock in Japan increased steadily, reaching 39.7 trillion yen at the end of 2020. The proportion to the GDP increased to 7.4%. Now, FDI stock in Japan by region and country. So let's see, where does most of the foreign direct investment come from? By region, Europe accounts for 46.7% of the total stock and is the largest. By country region, the US accounted for the largest at 23.7%, followed by the UK with 14.7%. So here we can see the different regions: Europe, North America, and Asia, followed by Central and South America. And then here we have it more in detail by country, with the US, UK, Singapore, Netherlands, France, Switzerland, and so on. Now, let's take a look by industry. And as mentioned, a big portion of the foreign direct investment has been from finance and insurance. By industry, the FDI stock of the non-manufacturing industry accounted for 62.8%, and that of the manufacturing industry accounted for 37.2%. By detail industry, the finance and insurance industry accounted for 41.6% of the total, as we can see here, followed by transportation equipment, electric machinery, communications, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, services, real estate, general machinery, transportation, glass and ceramics, and others with 6.1%. This was it. I'll put a link for this report in the description below. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.